The public sector strike continues across the country. Around 155,000 federal workers have walked off the job, affecting so many industries across Canada. The Public Service Alliance of Canada, or PSAC, is demanding better pay for its members. Now, to talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, Canadians are all about supporting these federal workers for better wages, better pay, but the union also wants $3 million for a social justice fund?
This is a perennial ask from the Public Service Alliance of Canada. They'll sell it to the government as well. It's just 1 cent for every hour worked. It works out to about $3 million a year for a political slush fund. And smartly, governments going back over the decades, liberal, conservative, back to liberal again, have always said no. This is not what the general public, the taxpayer, should be funding, just because the union wants to do it. I'm sure it would be causes that, if I use my own union as an example, yes, I'm in a union. It's not by choice. It's part of being in my job. Well, they support a bunch of political causes I don't. Now, can you imagine that with a union with 155,000 public sector workers? They're going to be supporting all kinds of crazy stuff. But, the wage demands, that remains one of the sticking points. And really, the government's offer is fair compared to recent contract settlements. The contract demands from the union aren't crazy for most of the workers. So they're asking for 14.5% over 3 years. The government's offering 9%. I'm sure you can find somewhere in the middle on that. But for the taxation workers, Hal, they're asking for 9% immediate raise plus a bunch of higher annual raises that would bring it up to about, be the equivalent of a 30% raise over 3 years. That's not something that's going to happen. And it's hard to find common ground there. Like I said, for the majority of workers, I think it's about 120,000. You're trying to parse the difference between 9% and 14.5%. At some point, you say, let's meet in the middle or close to the middle. You can't do that when it's 9% versus 30%.
Now, the union has also discussed moving picket lines to block ports in Canada. Wouldn't that kind of be like blocking the ports of entry at Coutts here in Alberta, and why the Emergencies Act was invoked?
It absolutely would be. And I can't believe that Chris Aylward, the head of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, is talking about that. I'm sure that we could rewind the tape and find him or others in PSAC calling on the government to do something about the Freedom Convoy and the groups that latched onto it, blocking ports of entry. Because, somewhere like Coutts, it's a land border crossing, but it's considered a port of entry into Canada. So whether he's talking about having federal workers block land border crossings or airports or marine ports, that's exactly why the government said they needed to invoke the Emergencies Act. I think it would end up with them losing what little public support they have. It's interesting. People are generally, everyone understands the need for a raise. Dealing with inflation, we can all look at our own household budgets and go, yeah, they deserve a raise. I'd like a raise, or I just got one. We can understand that. It's the rest of it where the public service unions just do not have the public on their side. And I think they know that.
Brian, one of the other big headlines this week included the new Volkswagen EV battery plant for Ontario. Now, that's good news for those in central Canada, which would create around 3,000 new jobs. The Trudeau government offered $13 billion in subsidies for an investment by Volkswagen of just $7 billion. 13 billion taxpayers' dollars, VW $7 billion. You say Albertans should be outraged by this. Why is that?
Well, they absolutely should. All Canadians should be. But I do want to caution this. The headline number of 13 billion, that's not a direct subsidy. And I think that point is important. When you pull back and you look at the actual direct subsidies, which I'm never a fan of, but it's part of the reality of landing these big companies. And it's especially a reality today when dealing with Joe Biden and the Biden administration and their Inflation Reduction Act, which has $1 trillion on the table to attract industries like this, to create jobs. It is incredibly hard to compete against that. And that offer by the Biden administration came out in the middle of the negotiations with Volkswagen. And so the federal government sweetened the pot at the end. So the actual upfront subsidies, it's a $7 billion investment from Volkswagen. That includes $500 million from the Ford government, the Ontario government, and $700 million from the Trudeau government in Ottawa. The rest, a lot of it is tax breaks in exchange for production targets and job targets being met. And so I never love hearing those described as subsidies, just like I don't for the oil and gas industry when we're talking about exploration and you can get tax credits, you pay a lower tax rate. This plant will create about 3,000 direct jobs. It's going to have supplier plants next to it. There's 1,500 acres set aside for industrial development here. The Volkswagen plant, which will be the biggest in Canada, is only 370 acres. The rest is going to be all the other plants. So 30,000 jobs total. That's massive. So for the people saying, well, you still shouldn't give them a tax break, they're a big company. You've got the choice. You can tax them at, for example, half the rate and get some taxation plus all the taxation from those jobs, or you can tax them at the full rate, but have zero jobs and zero investment. Which one is the smarter of the two? The Prime Minister said Canada will get its money back within 5 years. I'm highly skeptical of that, but this isn't the old-fashioned type of just hand them the money that we used to see decades ago. I'm not a big supporter of the Trudeau government, but governments of all stripes at all levels have gotten smarter than what we were years ago when it was just hand over the cash to the CEO.
Brian, many Canadians are still talking about the Chinese election interference issue. It's a big story. It appears as though Prime Minister Justin Trudeau may have put the issue behind him. Has he? And is he in campaign mode right now? What are you seeing?
Well, I can point to several things, including some of the comments he made at that Volkswagen announcement last Friday. It was kind of strange. I've been to a lot of these announcements, and they tend to be nonpartisan. You don't take shots at other parties, other levels of government. And yet there was Justin Trudeau taking a shot at Karen Vecchio, the local Conservative MP who came out in support of this, and taking shots at Pierre Poilievre. You've got the CEO of Volkswagen sitting there putting in money, and you're talking petty partisan politics of making sure you score a point. He definitely seemed campaign mode. Then there were two other videos that he put out. One, Justin Trudeau just decided he had to tell us once again that he's pro-abortion, pro-choice in his language. He put out a video and he's holding up his phone and he says, maybe you've seen this video. And it's the video of him confronting or being confronted by the teenager, I think 16 or 17-year-old kid who he told to pray more on his abortion stance for being pro-life. It was a campaign style video for that. And then he's got another video that I swear he just took the text of a Doug Ford speech from the last election and copied and pasted it, because last election here in Ontario, Doug Ford kept saying, we're the party that says yes to new jobs. The opposition says no. And that's what Trudeau's doing. He's saying that the Conservatives are the party of no. They're no to this, no to that. We're saying yes. We're going to build. We're going to do great things. Three very campaign-like moments within a matter of days says to me, he's not worried about the Chinese election interference story anymore. And whether an election is coming or not, he's back on campaign footing.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, Brian, says he wants to keep the coalition with the Liberals in place until the year 2025. But let me ask you something. If Trudeau's in campaign mode right now, is there any talk or any chance that maybe Singh would pull the plug on the coalition earlier so we could go to the polls sooner?
I haven't seen that from Jagmeet Singh. And, every time you and I talk about this, Hal, I get emails saying, well, Jagmeet Singh just wants to get his pension, which kicks in 2025. There might be some truth to that, but also he has other factors to consider as well. And the NDP just isn't in a good spot. If we were to see a sudden election, my guess is it would come from the Liberals if and when they feel comfortable. The Conservatives tend to be ahead in most polls right now, but not near majority territory at this point. And so, if the Trudeau Liberals see an opportunity, they'll be very opportunistic and try and seize that and try and see if they can win in the right locations to either expand their minority or even go for a majority. Majority is unlikely at this point. But one thing's clear, Justin Trudeau, in my mind, he's got the election interference behind him, and he still wants to fight Pierre Poilievre come next election, whenever that happens to be.
Brian, days after the Rogers takeover of Shaw's mobile and internet business, the company announced changes to the executive leadership team of what will be the merged firm. Now, people from both companies have taken on top roles, but the naming of a Trudeau Insider has raised some eyebrows. Brian, there appears to be a little bit of controversy surrounding Navdeep Bains.
Man, Navdeep Bains, longtime Liberal MP, smart guy, got to know him when he was on the opposition benches years ago and when he was first elected. When the Trudeau Liberals came back and won power in 2015, he became the industry minister. And he was the industry minister for 6 years. He was in charge of regulating the telecom companies. Now he's going to be the guy who oversees the lobbying of the Trudeau government for Rogers. That is quite the turnaround. There is a 5-year cooling off period for cabinet ministers, for senior government officials when they leave government to when they can lobby the government. It's called the Federal Accountability Act. Stephen Harper brought it in 2006. Navdeep Bains is only, if you go by when he left cabinet, he's only 2 years, 3 months from when he resigned as Minister of Industry. So he's got almost 3 full years to go before he can lobby the government. Now, both he and Rogers say he will not be communicating with the government on behalf of the company. But it just shows how insular we can be, especially here in central Canada. I've been saying it seems like this part of the country never got over having the family compact run as, this group of families that is just in charge no matter how elections go. And this feels like that. It feels very cozy, very insiderish. And, is it going to be Navdeep Bains running into his former cabinet colleagues at events? Is it going to be somebody calling up and saying, hey, Francois, good to chat with you. Nav told me I should call you. All these things raise questions. I mean, and this is not a small thing. Rogers is one of the biggest telecom companies in the country. They're taking over Shaw. That's going to make them even bigger. They've got a lot of issues to deal with the government. And do they now have an insider track?
Yeah, let's see how this plays out. Brian, a court case challenging the May 2020 gun ban decree by the Trudeau government has been going on in Ottawa, but there's been very little media coverage of it. Why do you think that is?
I can tell you why I'm not covering it beyond the fact that it's in Ottawa. I believe there is a live stream of the court case. It is a long, drawn-out process, Hal. It's been more than a week of lawyers for various groups getting up and talking, some lawyers speaking all day. It's very complex. This is hard to cover and hard to get media attention on a long, drawn-out court case like this when it's something sensational like a murder trial. So I know that myself and some others in the media are paying attention to it. I know people like Tracy Wilson from the CCFR are putting out regular updates online. But this is an incredibly complex case, and you've had attorneys general from the various provinces getting up. You've had the federal government getting up. You've had different organizations representing gun owners, and it's very thick, complex arguments in terms of why it's either the right thing to do, the Order in Council banning all these guns, or how they violated either the charter or various existing laws and past court decisions. So this will not be the end of it, regardless of who wins. I believe it will be appealed to the Supreme Court. If the government wins, I can see the Supreme Court saying they won't hear it. If the gun groups win, then definitely the Supreme Court will hear it, most likely, in my view, in a political attempt to overturn any victory by the gun groups.
Brian, one of the big stories we've had on Bridge City News recently was that $20 million gold heist, which took place at Pearson Airport in Mississauga. It almost sounded like something lifted from a movie script. Have the police made any arrests yet? What's the latest?
No, they have not said much. There's a story that I broke a week ago, stumbled across it. When we first heard about it, it was $100 million worth of gold. Turns out that was the full shipment. They didn't get the full shipment. Whoever got away with it, and I'll explain something in a second, whoever got away with it only got part of the shipment. And what's interesting is when you look at the language the police said in their only news conference on this issue, They didn't say it was a robbery, and a robbery has a very specific definition. You've got to have guns or knives. You've got to either use force or threaten force while you're stealing something. Theft is you're stealing it without violence or the threat of it. But what the police said was that these valuable items, gold and banknotes to the tune of 22 million, it was removed by illegal means. That's interesting choice of words, and it's always worth noting that police are normally very precise in their language. So still trying to figure out what removed by illegal means means, to sound like Bill Clinton a little bit there.
Yeah. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.